Swanee, God has smiled on the Gators, no question about it.
Alrighty, so the Florida Gators completely dismembered the Prairie View A&M Panthers last night. Uh, I don't even know where on earth do I start. Florida, they just annihilated them in epic fashion, 114-55. Yes, you heard that correctly. That is the biggest margin that a number 1 seed beat a number 16 seed in the history of March Madness. The previous record, I think, was when Kansas beat Prairie View again. Prairie View's went on the receiving end of both of those. The previous record was when Kansas beat Prairie View by 58 points. I think it was during the 80s or the 90s. I can't remember the exact year because I had looked it up last night, but I've forgotten since then. But Florida broke their record in that regard. It's the second biggest victory in March Madness history, margin-wise. And it's obviously the biggest margin of victory in UF history. So it was just an all-around great performance. Rueben record tied the University of Florida season record for double-doubles in a year. So many reserve players, including 7'9" giant Ollie Rioux got a bucket. CJ Ingram showed some capability. Alex Lloyd got his first bucket in the tournament. A lot of guys got a lot of playing time. A lot of the reserves, I should say, got a lot of playing time towards the end of that game. It was just total annihilation by Florida. Prairie View came out like you expected, a team that was expected to lose, and they did have a tournament victory in the first 4, so it's like their season was almost made by that alone. That was the third time in the history of Prairie View A&M that they've made in a March Madness tournament. They were created in 1980, so for them, they at least can say that they got a chance to be on the big stage, even if it was in that fashion. They came out swinging. They actually were competitive with UF for like the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game. Yeah, the game at one point was tied 15-15. They were nailing 3-pointers, but I knew that they were going off of adrenaline and dopamine and just excitement. So eventually, when the game went along, you could definitely see who was the more talented, the bigger, the more physical, and just who was just the better program, and that's what Florida was. Florida just naturally was the bigger and badder, and more imposing basketball team throughout. The Gators had more points in the paint than Prairie View had overall, and this is why you go all out for that number 1 seed to get you a spot in the first round in like this. And I know people are going to say, well, it was Prairie View, so Florida should have beat them in the fashion that they did. Well, I'd rather Florida do what they did to Prairie View than could be the Duke, who was ranked number 1 overall in the tournament, that struggled and even trailed Siena at halftime. Like, there was a very good possibility that Duke may have even, could have lost that game, if Siena didn't exhaust their entire starting 5 lineup throughout the whole game and actually gave those guys little periods of rest when they were up big. Maybe not big rest, but like, a minute, 2 minute, maybe 2.5. So I'd rather Florida do what they did against Prairie View than what Duke did against Siena. Now, having said that, the Gators are now going to play the Iowa Hawkeyes, who beat Clemson on TNT before Florida played Prairie View on TNT. Florida and Iowa are going to be playing Sunday. I think it will be on TNT again, or maybe TBS. It will be on TBS at 7:10 p.m. And they're still going to be in Tampa because we're out of the first round now. Now we're in the second round. They'll be playing Iowa. If you remember the game when Florida visited Oklahoma right after the Auburn loss, it was a mauling. Florida was frustrated that they dropped the game at home, and OU was the unfortunate victim that came down the pike. This game obviously was worse. You could tell that Florida was still pissed off about the way they lost in the semifinals to Vanderbilt in the SEC tournament. Even after getting the number 1 seed and the privilege of staying in their state because they didn't have to travel across the country like some teams did, right? They were still, upset about the way they performed against the Commodores. Right before halftime, the TNT side court reporter asked Boogie Flan what was the leading charge for Florida's dominant 60-21 lead. And Boogie Flan admitted that they were driven from their performance against Vandy. We wanted to get that bad taste out of their mouth, quote unquote. A team with so much on the line played with their hair on fire. They played as if they were one of the teams that was expected to lose, and they didn't have high expectations for themselves already. Thomas Hogg, in the middle of the first period, dove full body onto the court to recover a loose ball. When you have a program that establishes the culture and establishes the standard and preaches and breathes competitiveness and desire to win in moments like that, it's what makes you appreciate how Florida has matured and blossomed throughout the Todd Golden era. They had a losing record his first year. Then through grit and determination, they made it to the SEC tournament finals and lost against Auburn. And, they lost in the first round of Colorado. If Michael Hanlatan had not broken his leg, I think they would have won the Colorado game. And then the next year, you see the way they just ran through the SEC tournament last year and went through so much adversity in the second round matchup with UConn, and the comeback against Texas Tech, the having to make a second half comeback against Auburn, and the way they didn't get a lead against Houston in the title game until the final minute. And now they're just blowing teams out handedly, and they're pissed off from losing a game that doesn't even deter their season. It just shows you how this team has gone from, learning to win to finally winning and knowing how to win and knowing how to do it at an even better fashion. Now, the work is far from done, but the loss to Vandy, I think, woke up another gear in this Gator unit. And if they are fortunate enough to see Vandy a third time, I'm very confident we won't see the same inefficiency that we saw in the previous matchup. And I think deep down the Gators are hoping Vandy beats Nebraska in the second round so they can see them again. Vandy and Nebraska, they play later on today, and I'm going to keep my eyes on that matchup because if Florida beats them, they'll see them in the Sweet 16. So I'm going to have my eyes on that, and I think that Vandy-Nebraska game is going to be pretty good. Any given day, the game can have the best team lose, and getting upset a week before the tournament could be exactly the reminder and spark that Florida needed to kind of wake themselves up again, because obviously they were cruising through with the way they were blowing out teams in the SEC and going 3-0 against Kentucky, and just handling their business in the fashion that they did. I think that loss to Vanderbilt really did some good for them, and now they're going to take their momentum into the second round. So that's really it. We're going to watch the second round games, and go Gators, and let's beat Iowa.